Is it really possible that a global star like Suga from BTS once received a disciplinary punishment from the South Korean military for something seemingly trivial? And why has this story remained hidden from the public despite dozens of witnesses seeing it firsthand? Was the tension in the training unit that day due to something far more personal than a drill? And who would have thought that the man at the center of it all was Min Yoongi himself, sitting quietly without makeup, without his signature hairstyle, just holding a water bottle and offering a faint smile like he already knew he was going to be reprimanded. "Hyung, you're being called," said a junior who looked nervous not because of Yoongi but because the one summoning him was the head sergeant. Known for his unforgiving stance on time discipline, and as Yoongi rose from his seat, his military boots weren't even fully tightened, prompting glances from his peers that hovered somewhere between pity and confusion. "Wasn't he always punctual?" whispered one bunkmate, while another replied. "But today he woke up last, even skipped breakfast." And as he stood before the briefing room, the door burst open from the inside without a knock and a loud voice rang out. "Min Young SSI, do you know the rules here?" And Yoongi simply nodded silently, not speaking, not defending himself, not making eye contact with his superior, just bowing slightly and fidgeting with the hem of his uniform. And when the sergeant stepped closer, his boot steps cut through the thick silence. "This isn't a concert, this isn't a stage." And Yoongi gave a small smile and said, "I understand. I was late. I'm ready to be punished." And the room took on an odd atmosphere because no one expected a world-famous idol to be so calm, to volunteer for punishment instead of offering excuses or justifications like many others before him. "All right, start doing push-ups until I tell you to stop," the sergeant said, visibly suppressing a smirk as if he couldn't quite believe this was happening. And as Yoongi dropped to the ground and began pushing up, a few soldiers from the next barrack quietly paused their routines to watch because this was a rare and surreal moment. And from afar someone whispered, "Is that really Yoongi from BTS?" And another replied, "Yeah, and he's doing push-ups as punishment." And as Yoongi counted slowly, almost rhythmically like a whispered rap, some officers couldn't help but chuckle. Not out of mockery but at the absurdity of the situation. "Hyung, are you okay?" one of his peers asked softly, and Yoongi just nodded, sweat beginning to drip down his forehead without once stopping. And when the sergeant finally barked, "Enough!" the shout felt like a silent round of applause hanging in the air, because not a single soldier spoke, everyone frozen in place, maybe out of respect, maybe disbelief, and the sergeant stepped forward, stared at him for a moment and said, "I don't need celebrities, I need soldiers." And Yoongi answered, "Today I'm not a celebrity, I'm a soldier." And the room echoed with that sentence. Some medics who were passing by paused and murmured. He could have asked for leniency, but he just took the punishment like everyone else. And, shortly after he returned to his barack, sitting silently in the corner of his lower bunk, drinking water without a word, and someone finally gathered the courage to ask, "Why didn't you explain? You could have said you were sick or something?" And Yoongi looked up and simply replied, "If I start making excuses now, I won't learn anything here." And that answer silenced the room more than anything else. Even those who had wanted to laugh only bowed their heads, and one asked again quietly, "But you did more than 80 push-ups, why didn't you stop when you could?" And Yoongi shrugged and said, "If I'm going to be punished, might as well do it right." And then a medic came in with a routine health check and said gently, "You look exhausted, Min Young SSI, you need to rest." But Yoongi just gave a small smile, looked out the window and whispered, "Sometimes what tires you isn't the push-ups, it's your own thoughts." And moments later the sergeant walked into the barack, looked at him briefly and said with a flat tone, "You didn't expect to be punished, did you?" And Yoongi answered honestly, "No, but I also didn't expect to wake up late." And the sergeant chuckled lightly, patted his shoulder and said, "So even celebrities are human?" And Yoongi just looked at him without replying, and as the sergeant walked away, he added without turning back, "Don't be late tomorrow or next time it's laps around the compound." And Yoongi responded softly, "I'll wake up at 4. And quiet laughter rose from different corners of the room, not mocking, but admiration slowly replacing awe, not for BTS the superstar, but for Yoongi the man. And a junior finally approached and asked, "Hyung, have you ever been punished like this before?" And Yoongi replied without hesitation, "Back when I was a trainee, but not for being late." for practicing too long and arguing with the choreographer. And the junior's eyes widened. You argued with the choreographer? And yoongi just smiled and said, back then I thought I knew myself best. But sometimes you need punishment to understand your limits. And that line settled over the room like a rare confession from a legend. And, quietly, a cleaning staff passing by whispered to her colleague, I saw him smiling while doing push-ups. And the colleague answered, maybe he's just used to being under the spotlight, even when being punished. And someone from logistics suddenly chimed in, but this isn't about fame, is it? I saw him. He didn't ask for special treatment. In fact, he was tougher on himself. And the story spread quickly to other units, reaching even the administrative office, which sent an internal memo to their superior noting, Min Yoongi displayed high discipline and awareness post-minor infraction. No further action required. Physical penalty carried out with full acknowledgement and without resistance. And the note was filed under his personal record, accessible only to the top commander. Yet, soon someone from the military public relations department began asking quiet questions to various witnesses. Did he curse? Did he show disrespect? Was there any outside interference? And each answer came back a firm no, and the PR officer stared at his tablet, whispered to his colleague, we can't release this publicly. People might misinterpret him as being too harsh on himself. And the colleague replied softly, but this is a side of BTS no one's ever seen. And that idea hung heavy in the air until they decided. No press release, no public statement, no social media update, nothing that would hint Min Yoongi had been punished by the military for oversleeping and being late to morning formation. But the story lived on, flowing through the corridors of the barracks, passed from mouth to mouth, becoming a tale only known to those who witnessed how a global superstar endured punishment without complaint, without cameras, without applause, just himself, the cold floor, and a slow count that felt more like the beat of a yet unreleased track. And that night, as all the barrack lights turned off, someone whispered from the top bunk to the bed below, Hyung, you're amazing. And Yoongi simply replied, I just woke up late. But the small unseen smile in the dark may have held far more meaning than words could ever explain. But that smile, though unseen by others, wasn't just about waking up late. It was a smile that hinted at something heavier, something deeper. And as the hours crawled forward inside the confined yet oddly intimate military compound, Suga, or Min Yoongi as everyone here referred to him, remained seated at the edge of his bunk while most of the other soldiers had already drifted off into fitful sleep. And there in the dim flicker of the emergency hallway light, one of the communication officers tiptoed in and whispered, Hyung, I think they're going to write about you. To which Yoongi turned his head slowly and replied, they won't, they can't, I'm not news here. But the junior leaned closer and said, but to us you're a lesson, not a headline. And those words sat between them in silence, until Yoongi sighed and said, being known doesn't mean being exempt. And just then the hallway echoed with footsteps as a logistics sergeant passed by, paused, looked at Yoongi and muttered, you really didn't have to do all 80, but you did? And Yoongi looked up and responded flatly, I wasn't counting. And for a moment, even the sergeant just stood there before nodding and walking away without another word. And from the back of the room someone who hadn't dared speak earlier now raised his voice, did it hurt? And Yoongi replied with eyes still facing the floor, it wasn't the pain that stayed with me, it was how quiet the room became. And another added, Hyung, we all watched you. No one moved, not because it was you, but because it felt like you were doing it for all of us. And Yoongi finally looked up, his voice steady but his eyes reflective. I wasn't doing anything noble, I was just trying to own my mistake. But one of the newer recruits blurted, but isn't that the point? And a silence returned until someone else quietly asked, what were you thinking while doing those push-ups? And Yoongi hesitated before saying, the beat of a demo I haven't finished, the breath between the notes, and the weight of knowing I could have avoided all of this if I just set my alarm correctly. And that honesty landed hard among those who were used to hiding behind bravado or laughter, and as the night air grew colder and thinner, even the medic who checked in during the early dawn rounds noticed Yoongi was still awake, his gaze fixed not on a phone or a book. And that truth weighed less than regret but more than pride. It didn't ask to be shared, yet it kept echoing in every nod, every silent gesture, every glance that met his across the crowded mess hall later that day. where no one dared to speak about it but everyone had already heard, already formed an image in their minds of Min Yoongi, not as a star but as a man who bent down to the ground 80 times without once bargaining his identity. And while most punishments inside military walls fade with time and get buried under routines and orders, this one lived on in the way routines quietly shifted around him. Not in fear or reverence, but in that rare military respect that isn't taught, just felt. And as he finished his meal and stacked his tray, someone from another unit who had only arrived the day before nervously approached and asked, "Are you the one who got punished?" And Yoongi didn't answer immediately, just looked at the young man's uncertain eyes and finally said, "I'm one of many who make mistakes." And the recruit looked down, nodded quickly and muttered, "My brother's a fan, he wouldn't believe you got in trouble." And Yoongi smiled faintly. "Then tell him I didn't get in trouble, I learned something." And without waiting for a response, he walked off, back to the compound, back to the list of duties waiting like clockwork. But each step now sounded different even in his own ears. Not louder, not heavier, just clearer. And when drill practice resumed in the yard, Yoongi's movements were sharper, his posture straighter. But there was still no arrogance in it, no show, and the same sergeant from before now called out to him in the middle of the drill, "Min Yoongi, you still think about that morning?" And without missing a beat, Yoongi answered back, "I don't forget what I've lived." And the sergeant muttered under his breath with a half smile, "That's the right kind of soldier." But not everyone responded the same. Some in the room whispered things they didn't say to his face. Words like performing, overcompensating. He thinks he's special. Yet none of them ever dared say it to him, and when one finally did during weapon cleaning, muttering just loud, "Enough. Bet you'd never be treated like this if you weren't who you are." Yoongi calmly placed his cloth down, turned and said, "Maybe, but I still got punished, same as you would." And the soldier retorted, "But you'll leave with a story, we leave with nothing." And Yoongi, without flinching, responded, "Then make your nothing worth remembering." And that shut the room down into an uneasy silence broken only by the sound of cleaning cloths and brushes. But later that night, that same soldier approached him outside during latrine duty, nervously shifting his weight, and finally said, "Sorry, Hyung, I was out of line." And Yoongi simply nodded. "It's easy to hate what we don't understand," and added quietly, "I've done the same." And without another word, they both continued their chore, no drama, no closure, just the kind of quiet understanding that grows only in places where everyone's stripped bare. And as the night thickened and inspections loomed, Yoongi caught his reflection in the small, fogged mirror of the sleeping quarters, not recognizing the face so much as the eyes. Tired but clear, drained but not defeated, and someone behind him suddenly said, "I think they're watching you more now." And Yoongi didn't ask who they were, just replied, "I hope they're watching the right things." And the voice asked, "Like what?" And Yoongi replied, "Not me, how I carry mistakes." And maybe that was the real difference, because fame had taught him how to hide cracks, but the military was teaching him to face them. And when the next morning came, early and cold and damp from an overnight drizzle, the new orders arrived for routine-based transfer schedules, and his name was on the list. Not for discharge, not for exemption, but for temporary reassignment to mentor incoming recruits. And when one of his current batchmates saw the list and laughed nervously, "They're making you a model now?" Yoongi replied dryly, "I think they're just giving me more ways to wake up on time." And the whole group chuckled, not mockingly but as if some invisible wall had been softened. And as he packed up quietly, the same junior who'd whispered, "We'll write about you," earlier approached again and this time handed him a folded note with one sentence on it. "You made it feel okay to fall down." And Yoongi didn't say anything, just slipped the note into his pocket and walked to the transport line, eyes steady, steps deliberate. And while no fanfare marked his departure, a few heads nodded respectfully, and the old sergeant grunted from a distance, "Hope the next batch listens better." And as the vehicle pulled away, Yoongi leaned slightly against the window, watching the base shrink behind him, not with nostalgia but with a strange sense of unfinished rhythm, like a verse without its chorus. And before anyone could blink, the transfer camp came into view. Same uniforms, different faces, and as he stepped off, the commanding officer glanced at the file and said, "So you're the one?" And Yoongi replied, "One of many?" And the officer raised a brow, "We'll see." But already, inside the camp, rumors had arrived faster than Yoongi did. Some exaggerated, some confused, some curious, and as he was shown his quarters, several fresh recruits eyed him from a distance, unsure whether to bow, speak, or pretend they didn't recognize him, and finally one asked timidly, "Are you the one from the punishment story?" And Yoongi sat on his bunk, laced his boots, and answered, "I'm the one still serving." And that sentence shifted something in the room, because in this place, identity is not a shield. It's a shadow, and you have to walk through it every day, and over the next few hours, Yoongi led drills, corrected posture, repeated commands, not with authority but with a clarity that unsettled some of the trainers, who later whispered, "He doesn't act like he's famous." And another corrected, "Maybe that's why they're watching." And still, Yoongi wasn't trying to be watched. He was trying to live rightly inside a moment he could have avoided, because he'd learned long ago that fame never saved anyone from themselves. And while the clouds above the camp thickened that evening, and the wind turned sharply cold, Yoongi stayed out a little longer after lights out, hands behind his back, pacing silently across the gravel, until one of the base trainers asked him quietly, "Still, can't sleep?" And he replied, "I'm not sure if I should." And when the trainer asked why, Yoongi answered, "Because some days, the hardest thing isn't waking up, it's falling asleep knowing you didn't do everything right." And as the camp faded into quietness once more, a distant phone on the admin desk buzzed. A message from HQ, marked confidential, with his name in the subject line. The glow from the small screen illuminated Yoongi's face as he picked it up cautiously, fingers trembling just slightly, and the message read, "Your conduct has been reviewed. No further disciplinary action. Continue with assigned duties." And for a moment, relief and frustration tangled inside him. Relief because the punishment was officially over, frustration because the weight of that morning still lingered in every breath, every glance, every silent judgment from others. And when he put the phone down, the camp around him was still asleep, but Yoongi's mind was wide awake, replaying the morning's events, the sergeant's harsh words, the whispered doubts, the unexpected respect, and a question that no one ever asked out loud but everyone seemed to feel. Did a mistake define a soldier, or did the courage to face it shape who he really was? And in the stillness, another message popped up on his phone, this time from a trusted fellow soldier. "You holding up okay? We all have our mornings." And Yoongi typed back slowly, "More than okay. Learning?" Then paused before adding, "Thanks?" And the reply came instantly, "That's why you're the best at this." And that small exchange carried a warmth no accolade could match, and as dawn neared, Yoongi found himself staring at the empty bunk beside him, imagining conversations he might have had, moments lost to silence, and the ironic truth that even as someone who'd stood in the spotlight millions of times, the hardest place to be was often just a quiet room with only your own thoughts. And suddenly a knock on the door startled him. The guard called softly, "Sir, a visitor for you." And when Yoongi opened the door, it was the sergeant from the morning, face softer, eyes less sharp, holding a simple envelope, saying, "Thought you might want to see this." And inside was a handwritten note from the commanding officer of the previous camp. "Discipline is not just about punishment. It's about growth. Your dedication is noticed." And Yoongi looked up, voice steady but quiet. "Thank you. That means more than you know." And the sergeant nodded. Sometimes, the hardest punishments teach the deepest lessons. And as the door closed behind the sergeant, Yoongi felt the weight in his chest shift. Not lifted, not erased, but transformed, because in the end, it wasn't about the punishment or the mistake. It was about what came after, how he chose to rise, how he chose to carry himself forward, and with that thought, a final text from the young recruit came through. "Hyung, you made it. Okay to fall down. What will you do next?" Yoongi's fingers hovered over the keys, then slowly typed, "Keep walking forward, no matter what." And with a long breath, he laid down, eyes closed but not asleep, and somewhere deep inside, the quiet pulse of resolve began to beat stronger, steady and unyielding, leaving the rest of the story still waiting, unread, untold, and far from over.